بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're well. Today's discourse is titled Why Am I Here? And I want to talk about a few things that are on my mind or have been on my mind about this topic and this idea, and hopefully we can get through them, most of these points today. I have another discourse already on purpose, so there may be some crossover discussions, and maybe some rejoinders as well. So what I want to do today is the reason behind this discourse, or kind of my intention behind it, or the title itself, is related to our lives, living our lives, the part that religion plays in our lives, and a sense of misinformation, misguidance, and those two, I would say, about how we are supposed to interact with religion, inevitably God, really. And the reason this topic is quite important, I believe, is because most people out there, most of us, at some point in our lives, had let's bear with me, let me get rid of these notifications, keep popping up, have gone through a type of religious evolution, in the sense that when you're young and 17, 18, your perception of God is different when you're in your 20s, when you're in your 30s, and when you grow up. As you grow up, your perception changes depending on your experiences, what you've learned, what you have seen. So there are many different factors in terms of how you perceive or what your relationship is like with God. The problem that I want to discuss today is, and it was a subtitle, I think, that are we overcomplicating our relationship with God? And that's the issue that I really want to talk about. That what is our obligation really in terms of what should our personal relationship be with God and even with religion? So I want to tackle some of those things. And I want to talk about realism and idealism and these few other things as well, and complications, and then decluttering our relationship. I'll begin with kind of mapping the landscape and looking at just the introduction to the idea of purpose. We all exist on earth knowing that our life will come to an end very soon for some, or sooner for some than others, of course. But as from a personal perspective, very soon. Time for us and the way we process and perceive time is very short regardless. Moments are fleeting. And especially given the modern lifestyle that we have, the modern day itself, it kind of pushes you to do things very quickly. And our lives are so full of different things that it's very difficult to record time or appreciate the idea of time. I don't see anybody really sitting there, in a field tending to flock for, 7 or 8 hours and having time to think. Even when people are traveling, previously, the idea of travel was, there's a story I think Sheikh Hamza Yusuf mentioned about a journey of a Mauritanian man. I can't remember exactly, but and somebody told him that, look, I get from a particular place the same amount of miles to another place, in hours, and it takes you so long. And he said, what do you do with all the time that you have left over in the spare time? So there were people of the desert appreciate what the idea of free time. Of course, in kind of life of procrastination that most people live, we don't have any appreciation for time. We don't respect time in that sense. So our time we just give up entirely to Netflix or binge watching, and we don't really respect the time that God has given us and use it for something that develops us spiritually. And I don't mean sitting there with a tasbih. Developing spiritually can be in many different ways. So considering our lives are so short, The $1 million question is, why are we here? And as believers, we don't really need to answer that question, considering we already know the answer. What we do need to reflect and think about it deeply. The first point I want to mention is the idea of what role is religion supposed to play in our lives. That's the first question I want to deal with. So, our religious ideas, our beliefs especially, are supposed to lead to something that's actionable. And this is a very important point. That if belief is not leading to action, then the belief in and of itself is almost disconnected from reality. I.e., that if we believe in God, which we do, then, and God has revealed a book to us telling us how to live our lives, or how to live a spiritual life, a good life in that sense, spiritually rich life, then that belief is supposed to translate as a kind of spiritual awakening, spiritual change, a constant spiritual transformation in people. And unfortunately, what's happened is we have belief, but yet that belief often doesn't have any impact in our lives. And this is one of the worst states to be in a sense, for both the kind of pseudo-religious person and for the person who doesn't care much for religion. Now, you can accept it from people who don't care much about religion. They just don't care. They're like, oh, we kind of believe, but we couldn't really care less. We're not here. We're not really interested in it. That person I can understand. But people who believe and make their belief known and seemingly are amongst the people of belief and the people of practice, if it's not reforming them, then there's a little bit of a problem in understanding, definitely. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention, that the idea of believing in God should inevitably result in some form of change in a person. And the reason for that is because believing in God, also we would believe how God has described the world and how God has kind of informed us of the temporality of this world and the almost illusion of the world, and we would take heed in that. But there's a huge dissidence here. There's a huge problem here between belief and action, and I want to kind of unpack that now and the reasons for that. So I want to go through them, the few that I have. Number one, our relationship with God often, for many people, is based on our training and our kind of childhood experiences. As children, the way we experience religion. So I'll give you an example of it. This is something very, very important about trauma as well. That many people, when they grow up, if they had parents that were like really religiously kind of strict, and they would use God at every given moment, every kind of wherever they could use God to discipline their child, what you tend to find is those children will grow up with incredible problems and traumas in relation to God. You'll find that they'll have huge waswasa problems. In fact, some of them will leave the religion eventually, because their God to them, or they interpret their idea of God, is what the parents told them. And not only what the parents told them, but it's the parents themselves, in a sense. That when they hear God, what they're reminded of is the attitude their parents showed them. So they can't really break out of that idea. And that's why it's very important that we do not use, as if your parents, or if your teachers even, use God to threaten children. By threatening them with God, number one, you don't have any authority to do that, and we'll address that towards the end of the discourse. But why would you need to do that? Like, why can't you tell, if your child has lied, why can't you have that discussion without saying, well, if you carry on lying, God's going to throw you in hell, or there's a place for those types of people, or la'natullah al-kadhibin, or whatever it may be. Why do you need to invoke God for that in disciplining the child? Do you think children cannot be disciplined without invoking God? as a threat mechanism. So that's a really, really bad thing too. But unfortunately, most people have grown up like that. That we've grown up in a sense with a sense of deep guilt. So that's one problem within the parent-child relationship, where God is used almost as a way to threaten children, and they grow up with that trauma, and then their interpretation of God and their relationship inevitably with God is very problematic when they get to their teens or even later on in life, and they don't even know why they have a problematic relationship with God, but it's because it's rooted in the idea that they've always interpreted God to be somebody that if they don't behave, they'll be punished for it. And it's very difficult to unteach or or remove that idea from them. Another point is often our relationship with God at the stage of when we're teens. And this is often many people, especially from the 90s, if you're 80s baby anyway, early 80s. Most of the people here in this country, Muslims, religion wasn't really you don't find many young people that were religious, let's put it that way. But in the 90s, we found this huge kind of surge in religiosity. So, and many of us were teenagers then. And when you experience religion in your teens, often it's very exciting because it's something different. And whoever pulls you in first, that's your religion then. Your religion is whoever pulls you in first. And this is why you have this case of this girl, what's her name? What's that girl's name who's been, her citizenship has been revoked? Shamima is her name. Hamza, help me out. I think that's her name. Yeah, let's assume that's her name. Where she is, groomed into, at the age of 15, into this cult. There, Shamima Begum. Into this cult. And inevitably, her traumas now, I've heard she's lost multiple children as well, have died. She is only she must be 20 or whatever now. But what she has been through, she was just a child when she went. We don't know what her state or what her relationship with God is anymore. But many people go through that type of thing. Even in the UK, the types of people that you meet when you're young, if they, for instance, were again still people who are trying to work their religion out, but they're zealous, and then you take on that mantle, and you become heavily influenced. And as you grow up, you begin to see maybe that the earliest relationship with religion for you may have not been the best. Others have a good relationship, don't get me wrong. They meet really good people, and their first religious relationships are very good, and it stays with them for the rest of their lives. My point here is that our religious ideas are often shaped by these two early periods. They're often shaped by that. Because when people get older, their relationship with religion is much different to when they get into it when they're young. In fact, I've experienced some people who got into religion when they were young, became, they began to pray and stuff. And then when they got to their 40s, 30s, they began to resent it. It's as if they had missed out, because now they have almost like a midlife crisis. And they're thinking to themselves, wow, I could have had a better balance, shouldn't have been so extreme. I could have enjoyed the dunya a little more. So now they just break down, and they try to fill all that, fill the time that they have now with what they've missed out previously, so it can work that way as well. Now, man is in constant war between the animal and angelic form. So we're always at war between our animal side, which is the side of desires and all the negative qualities often, hate and arrogance and all these types of things, and the angelic form. And the angelic form of man is, of course, the pure soul. I'm not a nafs radiya, the kind of the self. And we're always in that battle. Those who are predominated by the animal are led to devastating ends and unabating carnage and harm to others. And we talked about narcissism last week, and we will follow that up, inshallah. I did say it may not be next week, maybe in a few weeks. That the narcissist can never, the reason they stay narcissists for a very long time is because they can never accept or admit there's something wrong with them. It's a defense mechanism for them. And when they do that, of course, they can reform themselves and change. But until they do that, they will never change, and they will continue in that with that same pattern you'll see. However, those that find truth, the path to it, or chance upon those traveling on it, often activate their angelic side and begin to truly see beyond the fog of uncertainty. What is this path, uh, and why do only a few traverse it? So we'll move on to deen now, the idea of deen and what deen means. The word deen from dana yadinu means to be indebted. So we, as of course, as human beings, are indebted. We're in a state of constant debt, spiritual debt, and that is to God, of course, a debt that can never be repaid. But the least we can do is show shukr. So we're in a constant state of debt, and we can never pay that debt off, of course. But God has not only almost forgiven the debt in a sense, but God has provided us with more and more kind of ni'am, bounties, and still we don't have gratitude for Him. Now, we come, or we are born with nothing, and we have nothing to repay God with. So the Prophet ﷺ said, the intelligent one is he who is enslaved himself, dana, and works for that which shall be after death. Meaning, the intelligent one is the one who kind of gives himself up for God, or gives herself up for God, and then they work for that which is after death. Now, 1400 years after the Prophet ﷺ has left this world, we're still left with that same problem. We're still left with a deep problem of that a deep problem whereby we can't have a good or healthy relationship with God. I've mentioned some of the things that are causes of that. But what I want to get to is what currently religion is to people. So I want to talk about some maybe more controversial things. Take, for instance, right now, take the subcontinent. If you go to the subcontinent, have a look at what scholars are speaking about, you'll find that it has nothing to do with people's lives. Subcontinent scholars often are obsessed with this idea of making everything an issue of belief, of iman. And they just, I won't say subcontinent scholars actually, because there are great scholars there as well. And maybe the public preachers and people that kind of dominate the religious narrative publicly. And they talk about things that have got nothing to do with me and you. They don't affect our lives at all. In fact, if you're on the internet today, onto YouTube, you'll find that most public speakers are talking about stuff that's got nothing to do with you and nothing to do with your life. It won't change. If you listen to the whole thing 10 times over, it wouldn't make any difference to your life. That religion, the way it's been represented now, and often people's relationship with it, watching stuff on internet, has nothing to do with spiritual reformation or change. Nothing. Often it's to do with things that don't even matter, historical matters, issues of khilaf, debates that are taking place, controversies, but it's got very little to do with change in the human being. So what we have to ask ourselves is, why did God send prophets? The answer to that is very simple. It was to spiritually reform the people, or bring people to faith, so that their lives can be changed and they become spiritually excellent people. That, unfortunately, that idea, that predominant idea of what religion was, has disappeared. Surely, doesn't exist much anymore. Now, religion is, when we talk about religion, it's more about debating or discussions or detailed analysis of things, but it's not to do with people's lives. Sometimes things are so overcomplicated that you can't even follow every kind of micro rule anymore, or they're so kind of demanding, the ulama of people, and we'll get later into the idea of idealism and realism, that they make your life so difficult that you just don't want to do it. And this is the current relationship, and I'll give you some examples. I don't know if it was a spoof, Hamza, that message you sent, the Twitter message yesterday. Was it real? I want to read this out, because this is how ridiculous things have become now. And I'll somebody's text, my reflection in my glasses is distracting. I can't do anything, unfortunately. So let me read it. read it out. So there was this tweet, and some girl put a tweet out saying some women are so pious that when they're in the labor ward, that they do not, when they're giving birth, this is, they don't scream because they do not they do not want non-mahram men to hear their voice. I don't know if this was a joke, uh, um, or if it was. I don't know if it was a joke or not, but I hope it was, because it would be a good joke probably. But unfortunately, these are serious. People are giving these types of saying these types of things. I read another, and that was just on Twitter, but uh, it was real. There you go, very real. Then a guy replied to it jokingly, and he said, "Oh, but some brothers are so pious that they shout so loud to as to drown out the wife of the voice of their wives." I mean, this is how ludicrous people's relationship or their idea of religion is. This is how ludicrous it is. That's what people are deeming to be piety. That of course, mashallah, mashallah. That's anyway. My point is that there's a huge kind of barrier now for people to really interact with God, and that barrier has been created by human beings. They've made things so difficult, so cluttered, that one cannot have a real relationship with God. So I want to cover some of those things that are important. I want to simplify things. Number one, the time of the Prophet ﷺ, I don't know where they're from, but no, we can't blame it all. I mean, I've had some nutbags from the other side as well. But anyway, in the time of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, the religion was very, very simple. People, they had few obligations that same as we have now, the obligations. Life wasn't complicated. You can see that all the Sahaba, for instance, they had day jobs. They would have normal jobs, like, one was a farmer, another was maybe a tailor. You had another one that maybe he was Haddad, he was worked with metal, ironsmith. And that was their regular life. They would pray in the masjid with the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. And then when they had freed up time, they would go and visit him and sit with him and take blessings from him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And life was very simple. In fact, the Sahaba were known, if you count, or let me put it this way, if we were all to, let's say 100 of us were to sit with the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu, if we ever got that honor, how many questions would we, besides being overwhelmed by his beauty and his purity and the fact that you're sitting with the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, just that very blessing to sit with him and experience his kind of company, alayhi salatu, just that would be enough. As the Messenger of God, the famous hadith where he said, my brothers, and they said, are we not your brothers? And he said, no, you are my companions. My brothers are those who come at the end of time. And they would give up everything that they own for just to see me or just to meet me. Obviously, contrary to what some people have been spewing around the internet about who the Messenger of God was and the idea of prophet worship and some ludicrous ideas. And people should keep their opinions to themselves, especially when they're ludicrous. Now, what would you ask the Messenger of God is the question. You would have many questions. You probably couldn't ask anything simply because of the atmosphere there. But the Sahaba, they asked less than 80 questions, around about 80 questions, if you can imagine. Why? Because they were worried that if we ask a question, God may reveal something about it. But the Messenger of God had said to them, he said, one of the things that misguided, took away Bani Israel from, misguided them, their constant asking of prophets, asking questions of prophets and differing with them. That's what led them astray. So they were very worried about that, I think. So they didn't really ask many questions, but also the religion was very simple. Not many questions were needed to be asked. So they would ask the Messenger of God certain things if it affected them, and then they would go and put that into practice. Now religion has become more of a academic exercise for people. They want to know about this and they want to know about that, but very little is related to our lives that we're actually concerned about, where we think, I need to know this because I need to change this element of my life. Rather, it's about, the more I know, the better for some reason I be. The more I study, the more information I have, and the two obviously they're not connected. So the companions' lives were very simple, and Islam in that time was very, very simple. It's very easy. The messenger of God would facilitate people's lives whenever they had a difficult. Look at the man that broke his fast. He comes to the messenger of God and he breaks his fast, and so he had to pay kafara. So he had relations with his wife when he's fasting. So he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, look, he first makes the rakah. The way he describes the whole situation was incredible, but the wording he uses. But then the messenger of God realizes what he's talking about. And he said, look, you're going to have to, make that up. There's a kafara for that, expiation. And he said, what's the expiation? The Prophet ﷺ said, look, you're going to have to fast 2 months, 60 days, without a break. And he said, oh, Messenger of God, I can barely do one. And you want me to do all that? Then the Messenger of God said, look, you have to feed a number of poor people. And he told him about that. And he said, look, I'm poor myself. I have no money. And the Messenger of God said, what do you have? He said, look, I have some dates at home. So he said, go and get the dates. So he goes and brings the dates to the Messenger of God. The Prophet ﷺ said, okay, now give these to some masakin, so to poor people. And he said, but I'm poor as well. He said, okay, look, take some yourself, but give some to the poor, and that'll be enough kafara for you. The idea was the Messenger of God was always looking for a way for him to facilitate, you could say, his relationship with God, to make things easy for him. Allah says in the Quran that Allah does not intend from you difficulty. He only wants you to have ease. So their lives were very uncluttered in that sense. Their relationship with God was very, very simple. They didn't do much, or they didn't look for complicated things to do. And the answer to their problems was very simple as well. Like the man who comes to the Messenger of God and says, "Oh, Sini Ya Rasulullah, give me advice." And the Messenger of God says, he says, "La taghdab, don't be angry." And he says, "Oh, something else." He says, advise me, because he thought that wasn't, I want something more, something different. The Prophet saw 3 times he said the same thing. Then he came to realize that must be my problem. And the Prophet said, control your anger and you'll enter Jannah. And the point being that there were really simple solutions to deeply rooted problems. And once they recognized them, they got on with it. So that's my point. My point was that in the time of the Prophet, the religion was very simple. There was a great beauty in its simplicity. And unfortunately, that's kind of disappeared. The religion has become very complex now, kind of micro fatwa era that we live in, where every ingredient, every little thing needs to be, people are worried about, and there's a lot of kind of waswasa related to it. And it leads to people being worried about often more than they should be worried about. Consider that religion is very, very simple. So that was the kind of way that the Sahaba lived in the time of the Messenger of God ﷺ. Now, a man has placed an infinite number of barriers between himself and the divine light. Why the complication? What has caused us to fall so far from God's message? We walk through life confused by all the noise. Now, I want to go through some of the complications in more detail now. Number one, and this is an important point, that when you read the Quran, God is addressing you. He's not addressing me whilst addressing you. He's addressing you. When I read the Quran, God is addressing me. That it's not very complicated. We have a direct connection or relationship, you could say, with God. And what we've done is often we've put so many people in between us and God that it's very difficult to reach God in that sense. Or we've complicated it so much. You can open the Quran today and you can read the Quran and you will definitely find yourself there. And you will definitely find God speaking to you. I don't know if it's a kind of a power thing or a kind of control mechanism, but unfortunately, some people out there in religious power, by preachers, etc., have almost made it out to the public that they can't have a relationship with God without them. No, you can absolutely, because the Quran is revealed for everybody, number one. And your relationship with God is your relationship with God. You don't have to rely upon X, Y, and Z. For instance, I'll give an example. Sometimes it can be a scholar, it can be famous, he can even be pious, at a point, and then that person falls. Let's say he's a famous public speaker, and this happened many times. You've seen, Reddit threads on public speakers being exposed for being a little naughty or getting up to no good, or I don't really want to have a masala segment in my discourses at all, so I'm not going to entertain that. But my point is, you see that. But people have invested so much in these people. They've invested so much of almost their belief in these people, that now that person is found out to be a fraud or a charlatan or fake. Now your iman is affected. What on earth has he to do with your iman and your relationship with God? Why did you invest any of your belief in him? You should invest your spiritual energy in your relationship with God. If he falls, he falls. Men have fallen, greater men have fallen. They asked Junaid al-Baghdadi, said, can a wali commit zina? Can a man of God, real pious, commit zina? I said, of course he can. He can, but you would assume that he would make tawbah immediately, in the sense that he would be more drawn towards the idea of tawbah. And one may argue that he wasn't a man of God in the first place, but anybody can trip and fall momentarily, make a mistake. So my point is, don't invest your religion in other people, or don't hand it over. Your relationship is with God, and you can find your place in the Quran, and God speaks to everybody. When you pray your salah, you're praying to God, you're not praying to people. So therefore, it's your relationship with God, not other people's interpretation of what that should look like. That's number one. Number two, God's mercy has been defined by man's selfishness and claims to exclusivity. Only we can receive mercy, not others, as we are more deserving. There's a hierarchy now that's been built for years. Everybody knows it. We see all the time this religious hierarchy. Twitter's full of it. I mean, if you want to see religious hierarchies, just go onto Twitter and you'll see know-it-alls. You'll see the holier than thous. You'll see all of them putting messages up, and Fajr moments on Instagram. For God's sake, why would we need to know that you pray Fajr in the masjid? There goes your reward for that. But my point is, you'll see this. Social media is kind of full of it. And what people have often done is, the way that they have presented Islam is almost as if, see, God's mercy is for people like me, not for people like you, because people like you are the scum of the earth. And, you need people like me. Again, this idea of dependency falls into a level of narcissism as well, that people promote. But this exclusivity is a very, very big problem. In all honesty, when God talks about in the Quran that nobody fears God except the ulama, but ulama there doesn't mean you're necessarily mean the one that knows a lot. You're talking about al-ulama al-amilin, those people who who know God, but they're people who put that into practice. And it doesn't mean here, of course, he has to be a mujtahid imam or a great, very knowledgeable person. Take, for example, Ibn Aliwa, the great Sheikh Muhammad Ahmad Alawi, rahmullah ta'ala, who died in 1936, Mustaghanam. He wasn't a great scholar in that sense, meaning he didn't study with many shuyukh and people like that, but he's considered to be a saintly figure, one of the greatest people of God of the last 100 years. So that kind of shows you that what's meant in that verse is people who know God but also put that into practice. Yeah. So there's this sense of religious exclusivity, and what's worse is on the ground where we have kind of religiously people who are really present themselves as holy people, and what they do is they use their pseudo holiness to bully other people spiritually, and I'll give you simple examples. Just being judgmental. Of course, I don't agree with the other side. Those who say, how nobody can judge me, only God can judge me, which is a famous line of Tupac. It's not the Quran, by the way. But yeah, you're right. Inevitably, God judges, but of course, that doesn't mean you don't obey God. But they're out there to get involved in people's lives. For instance, one of the things that the great Imam Shabrawi states in his Maratib al-Nafs, in his Degrees of the Soul, in his book, he writes that one of the diseases of the heart is to concern yourself in other people's lives. What does it matter to you about other people and what they're doing? And if they're religious or irreligious, not your business. It's not my business anyway. So how does that improve, again, a misunderstanding of our relationship with God? We assume that our care for other people's religiosity somehow changes our religion or our relationship with God. It doesn't. Nothing to do with, inshallah, I'll answer that question later at the end. Has nothing to do with our relationship with God. Next, the Prophet ﷺ has been misinterpreted, I would say, or mistranslated rather. And what I mean by that is this inevitably, unfortunately, people also use the Prophet ﷺ to advance themselves as well. You know, their misunderstanding of Sunnah, their claims to represent the Prophet ﷺ, and then, you know, being really bad people to other people, and you know, and so there's a deep misunderstanding often of who the Messenger of God was, alayhi salatu, and what he came with, and how we should take benefit from, and what his Sunnah means, alayhi salatu wasalam. So that's another issue as well. Often, you know, like people assume, for instance, you know, the little physical, you know, the Sunnahs that we have that are more overt in that sense. And there's sunnahs of like, they're just kind of jibili actions, like how you dress, how the Prophet ﷺ dressed. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ was the most elegant person that God ever created, and his dress is the most beautiful dress. But here, what we're talking about is that he never told anybody to dress in the way that he dressed ever. I mean, that was just a cultural dress and that he had, alayhi salatu wasalam. And that's easy to do, you know, it's easy to just wear the clothes, of course. And to say that you're following the Sunnah, but the real Sunnah is in his character, in his action, how he's dealing with people, in what he told people, or the behavior that he promoted, and told how he commanded us to behave. That's a real Sunnah, in the difficulties and having patience and all these types of things. The other things are normally born out of love, of loving the Prophet ﷺ. And one does that out of love, and of course will be rewarded for their love, but it's not something that the Sahaba understood to be, you know, the things that the Prophet ﷺ came to give to the people in that sense. You know, the way, the path to guidance in that regard. So some of the things are to declutter our relationships, or to declutter our relationship with God, such that it becomes a relationship of importance, and one of that really impacts our lives. Number one, the first and foremost, before anything, is obligations. Our obligations are there, number one, to only benefit us. That God is obligated. Let's have a look at the things that God has prohibited. He has prohibited them quite clearly, in the hikmah of it anyway, because it harms us. God creates us, he sends us to the earth. We are indebted to him. And even then, God sends us a message to save us from ourselves. That's a divine mercy. Even then, to save us from ourselves, God benefits not from our actions. God is the metaphysical infinite. He doesn't change in that sense. And God, all the things that he prohibits, and we always assume that, oh, these prohibitions sometimes, you know, why are there so many things prohibited? Well, it's nothing to do with the fact that God is benefiting. Of course, God doesn't benefit in that sense. God is not, that's not how we talk about God. It's because we benefit from that. He's trying to save us. And yet, we don't even see that. Take the idea of concept of adultery, for instance, how harmful it is to a person and society and family, etc. So the obligations, of course, are there to make shukr, but not only that. Every tradition, religious tradition, has the idea of prayer. And prayer is a way to connect with our spirit dimension, to move away from the kind of the animal or the bestial self, and move to the kind of angelic form, or the angelic dimension, and to connect us with that. So prayer is only for our own benefit in that sense. And then the Messenger of God kept obligations very, very simple. You know, obviously don't shoot me for this, but when you're little and you have to pray Isha prayer, and you have to pray 4 sunnahs, 4 fard, 2 sunnahs, then 2 nafil, then 3 witr, and then 2 nafil, 17 rak'ah. You go to masjid. And you know, when you're little, you know, your Fatiha is like as fast as, But to be fair, it's probably fast as most of the subcontinent Qadis when they're in a hurry in Taraweeh. But I mean, it's pretty quick and you're trying to get out of there. But why would you burden a child with 17 rak'ahs for Isha? Those 17 rak'ahs are the making of a wali. Like every nafal, every, one of the reasons they call it nafal is because the Messenger of God sometimes wouldn't read it, wouldn't pray. I'm not telling people don't read it, I'm not saying that. But to burden people with something almost to the level of obligation sometimes that will deter them from the action is not very healthy at all. It's not very, very healthy at all. People often ask me that, I'm struggling with my prayers and what should I do? And, I say to them, well, can you pray your fard? Just your fard, mahdan. I say, yeah, just pray your fard then. If you can minimally do that, pray your fard. And then work on, introducing sunnahs and things like that. But start with that. Just pray your fard. Don't feel guilty about it. Just pray your fard. The sunnah is a sunnah at the end of the day. It's very important, of course. But introduce it slowly. The fard is the obligation. And you have to try your best to complete that. And see as shukr. See as standing there every day, just thanking God that we breathe or we don't have certain diseases. And that, Allah says in the Quran, if you make shukr, we'll just give you more. So whatever you need more of, God will give you. And we stand 5 times a day. Even it's almost, to thank God. Not that we want more in that sense, but just to thank God that we exist. Shouldn't we stand at just 5 times a day? What is it? Accumulation of what? How many minutes? 20 minutes, 30 minutes in the whole day? So yeah. The prohibitions. Like I said, there are not many prohibitions in Islam. I read this fatwa. Now, some scholars have in the past said, and I think completely incorrectly because it's based on a very weak hadith, that women can't ride horses, they shouldn't ride horses. But the riwayah is very weak and it's not really acceptable riwayah anyway, in that sense. So, and we know that Sahabiyat who rode horses, they went to war and things like that. But apart from that, I read a fatwa, and this is the problem. When we see religious authorities, fatwa boards, people saying ludicrous things, then it turns people away often as well. And this fatwa, it's published in South Africa by this group of nutcases, in which this man was asked that, there's a woman, female, and she set up a horse riding club. She's a Muslimah, and it's only for Muslim women. Is the money that she gets from that halal, and is it permissible to hold that? And this guy goes on a rant. He said, whichever woman gets on a horse, she's despicable. She's a disgusting woman. She is a woman with no shame, no haya. This guy has some serious problems with women. I don't know what trauma he has, this guy. Must have some traumas, I don't know. I can't even qualify why he would say what. But it's it was such a horrible, and people read that. It's completely wrong, by the way, aside from the fact that it's wrong. It was so offensive, but you find this stuff all the time. Go on the internet's full of it. You're full of really hateful statements, but in fatwas as well. And that just put people off religion, or public talks, or where people are just being shouted at, and there's no love or mercy in it, or it's just, like these guys who are obsessed with just telling people they're going to hell, as if they're, at the gates of hell guarding it, and they've got this list where they can just put whoever they want on it. So there's that problem as well. And like I said, prohibitions are not many. It's a wonderful statement. I remember I watched this documentary. It's called The Strangers, I think. I don't think it's out. Maybe it is out. It was about the Murabitun in the 70s and 80s, and there was a man in there, and he was a convert. And he said the way he sees, like pork, for instance, he said, God has allowed all these things for me, and there's this one thing over there that God said, no, I don't want you to do that. And he said, so I'll just accept it, meaning I don't even need to ask any questions, considering God has allowed me all of this. And there's this one thing over there. Why do we need to debate or discuss or ask why God has prohibited that, considering all the things that God has made lawful for us? And like I said before, the things that we know of anyway, that we know the hikam, many things that God has prohibited, we can see the wisdoms very clearly and how it saves us from destruction often. Things like zina and stealing and all these other things. Number 3, prophetic character. That everything that is beauty is the Prophet. The Prophet is absolute beauty. The Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, is the most beautiful and the most excellent, and we find true beauty in him. And everything that is distasteful can never be attributed to the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. Nothing distasteful. So we accept all of this. We don't enforce it on others, but for ourselves spiritually, we accept it and we try to behave in that way. In the beauty that we find in the Messenger of God, we try to take it and place it in our lives. And about the beauty of the Messenger of God, I gave a discourse, the one before last call, with the one that I love, and that's, if you want to, you should watch that. If I would discuss that more there. Number 4, and this ties into the question as well. False spiritual felicity, I've told. False spiritual promises and delusions. These are often peddled by those in authority living off the piety from living of the piety of and the legacy of others as a means to control the masses. Guilt is the central tool employed to whip people into order. This false spiritual pursuit and emphasis often destroys hope. Communities and people are left feeling hopeless and worthless. The hadith on simplicity, especially. So anyway, I have some other points on that, but so this is kind of the false spirituality that's peddled. I have a whole discourse on this. I know I'm referring people to other discourses. Watch it if you find benefit. You don't need to. But called demystifying spirituality. I've discussed that there. But there are loads of people like that. These false kind of people who put like the image of spirituality as being there's a huge mystical dimension to it. But almost like if you sign up for my club, you're going to be spiritual and you're going to have spiritual experiences. And they just use people and use and abuse people. And you've seen probably my tone with these types of people in previous discourses as well. And I've got a lot of experience around these people, so I have some knowledge of it. So I'll answer these 2 questions. But I just want to finish. I've got loads more to say, but I'm kind of aware of the time as well. So I've put 3 different levels. So children, teenagers, and adults. And I just want to quickly, what does decluttering mean for all these children? Learn about the beauty of God. For instance, what about Malik? Somebody asked Malik about children fasting, and he said it's child abuse. Why are you making young children fast? In the sense that 6, 7, 8-year-olds, like, let them slowly develop into religion and through the beauty of it. Don't force it on them. Don't force it on them. They learn. Like, think about yourself as a child. Your children are rebellious and they don't want to do things. So shouting at them about religion ain't. Even if they, I have children. 4 children. If I tell my son to pray, have you prayed? And he had, obviously praying together is easier, makes it easier. But if I sit him there and start shouting at him, and what's his attitude towards prayer going to be? It's going to be, I'm going to do this, but I want to get it out of the way so Baba doesn't shout at me. And that's it. That's enough. I've done that. He's going to hate it. It's not the way to do it. So I try my best to, say, have you prayed? Or sometimes I know he hasn't prayed. I won't make it an issue. And then, and slowly develop that love. And as knowledge increases and, and he feels a connection with it, the great Shaykh al-Akbar said, I remember a statement of his that when he was a young kid, they would go to the masjid, and the imam, the Fajr prayer was too long. And so whilst they were praying, they would just run away. Children do those types of things. Look what he ended up becoming. So that don't panic and build the fruits of Iman, love and reliance, and they will at some point reap the benefits of those fruits. Parents shouldn't panic, we see sometimes parents showing off their kids, or sheikhs showing off their kids that their kid has memorized this or memorized this. Yeah, it's like footballers. I compare it to. Some footballers were very, very good as children, brilliant, and they just complete flops as adults. When they get into 19, 20, 21, they just don't make it. But they were brilliant as kids. So and others, so it's similar to that. Just because they're doing it as a child, it doesn't mean when they grow up they're going to do that as well. They may have a complete state of cognitive dissonance and leave it entirely. And so that doesn't mean anything with kids being really good as children. You had many very behaved children, and when they become adults, they become, they're off the rails. So it doesn't depend on that, of course, at all. Many people, of course, and be listening to this, when did you find religion? 18, 19, 20, 25, 30, 40, some 50. It's not dependent on just because you're good when you're young, you'll be even better when you're older. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. In fact, religious overload does the complete opposite. It does the complete opposite. And proof of that is, go and look at all the Darul Uloom students who are enrolled in Darul Uloom at 11 and 12. And when they get to 18, 19, or 20, and they just lose the plot, and they just become tearaways because they've been in madrasa for 8 or 9 years, being forced to learn and be a particular way. And we used to see that in Syria when I went to Syria. I was 18 years old, and I was only been practicing praying and stuff for a year. And I got there, I saw all these Maulanas coming from young guys, 18, 19, from England, from Darul Ulooms, and I tell you now, they weren't behaving. They were free now, finally out of the madrasa. So that's what happens. Teenagers, even more mercy is required and time. Seeds must be planted early and given time to come to fruition. Stop trying to imitate the ideals of others, which often add to the struggle and pain that was involved in those, which often, I don't know what I've written here, but stop trying to imitate the ideals of others, which often are missing the struggle and pain that was involved in those narratives. Meaning, when you see something out there, you just see the product, you don't see what may have led to that. So they need even more mercy, because teenagers go through so many different things, and give them time. Very, very important to give them time. As for adults, simplicity and consistency is important. The Prophet said the best of actions are the consistent ones, even if they're very small. Development of character over devotion, in the sense that devotion is there. Keep that simple, keep that basic, and develop your character. You see, praying more won't make you better necessarily. So if you think, I've got a really bad problem with anger, I'm going to pray 100 nafil a day, it doesn't work like that. You need to work out how to mend that problem, that character problem. Praying more won't fix that. Okay? And learning. And there's a few other levels as well. Inshallah, I'll take questions, because although I want to say more, but we're running out of time. So what's your advice when it comes to everyone must have a sheikh? No, that's not true. And what's the best way to rid these pseudo-spiritual notions? I really don't want to say this, but I've covered this in detail in demystifying spirituality, but I'll quickly answer it. This idea that man laysa lahu shaykh fa shaykhu shaitan, that he who does not have a sheikh, not hadith, by the way, he who does not have a sheikh is shaitan. This is not true at all. It doesn't mean that at all in any way or form. I've explained it in detail in that often people will use this. Again, I don't know, whoever uses it, they'll have their own intentions and stuff, but you'll have to work that out. But no, it's not the case. Ghazali was complaining in his time, Abdul Wahab Sha'rani complaining in his time, that spiritual masters are very few. That's like 900 years ago, like 600 years ago. We're complaining about the fact that there were very few spiritual masters, very few sheikhs of the spiritual path. My recommendation, very simple: if you have good people around you, yakfikum, yani, sufficient, that keep you in check, that keep you balanced. If you know people of knowledge that are also pious, but benefit from their durus, benefit from their company, there's more than enough for people. You don't need to give yourself to a person that often, and you'll see the catastrophic effects of some of these people and what they've done and the problems they've caused in communities and people's lives. How do you know that you've met this person, you've heard his speech, he's really wowed you, and you go and give your hand and become this kind of disciple? How do you know about the reality of this person after listening to one speech, spending one day? You don't even know the person. In fact, most of them don't live in the country, and you see them in a random visit. Previously spiritual leaders, teachers, were people who lived within the community. People saw them day to day. They had experience with them. They had track records. People knew that they're like 20, 30, 40, 50 years of piety that was shown in the community and helping the community. So they would take some disciples and they would give them something a little bit extra. That was all it was, some extra training, and and they benefited them. So that doesn't really, that kind of a paradigm doesn't exist anymore. So I would definitely say, take benefit where you can take benefit and live your life. Life is very busy now. We don't live in that paradigm anymore. and take as much benefit in this short period of time as you can, and try to practice as much of it, and read as much La ilaha illallah and salawat on the Messenger of God as one can. This is enough for dhikr for most people. La ilaha illallah and Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad is sufficient in you for people, even though some people out there making mockeries of these types of things. But it's sufficient for people. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the closest one to me on the day of judgment will be the one who recites the most salawat. It's enough. Try to stay away from these kind of things as much as you can and avoid them until you're sure. And like, would you, if you had a little bit of money and you really worked hard for that money, really worked hard for it, would you just give it away? Would you just invest it in an absolute, where it was not even 50-50, the 5% of success or something? You wouldn't do that. They're not you give yourself over like that to somebody. And not considering the turmoil to problematic times we've lived in, how many fraudulent figures are coming to the fore. So that's what I would say about that. Intelligence most people possess these days. They can't see past should people stop becoming more. Yeah, so Sufi Jedi, I like the name, but where the Jedi is based on his influence, Lucas' influence in Egypt, so he was there for a while from Sufism. But watch the discourse, inshallah. So watch that. I've explained it more, but that's what I would say. I mean, take it or leave it. If you find anything benefit in benefit, what I say, take it. If you find you've got your own input in that, Bismillah. At the end of the day, you will have to answer for yourself, and I will have to answer for myself, and we're all responsible. We can't blame anybody else. In fact, we can't even blame the devil. In the Quran, Allah is very clear that man blames the devil, and the devil says, "I didn't have any power over you." He said, "All I did was I promised you, and God promised you, and God promise was truthful, and mine was false." He said, "La talumuni, lumu anfusakum." Don't blame me, blame yourself. Even the devils. Leave another man. Inshallah, I'll take any other questions for today. Love the Tupac lines. I've got plenty more, I'm just hiding them, but I will drop them here and there. So, and more rappers. Don't worry, I'll try to segue them in some way. Hamza, if you have any, just WhatsApp me. I've got my phone here. Tip on reducing time on social media and converting this into good action with God. Social media. See, the thing is that I will sort out the. My uncle texted me and he said, "This reflection is distracting. I'll sort it out for next week. I can't do it today." Social media. See, I'm not really on social media in that sense, in any sense, really. So it's very difficult for me to say you should do this or that, considering I don't really care about it much in that sense. But definitely an easy thing would be, I had this idea of, well, just switch your phone off for an hour a day, maybe. Nobody's you're not gonna die if, you're not gonna. I have the two-phone philosophy, which I've promoted historically. Everybody who knows me about that. Have your smartphone, have what do you call it? Trap phone. Have your trap phone, or have your Nokia phones, and use one as a work phone almost, and use the other one as your normal phone with your actual number, and just put that away, and just like disconnect, from social media. One thing I always say about social media is social media detoxes. One, if they want a healthy relationship with social media, have your detox every month. Take 3 days off social media. 3 days off. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you can deactivate your social media account and then you can reactivate it. Deactivate it for 3 days a month. Start there. And you'll see that you don't need it. And, that helps. We introduced something really good a few years ago called No Wi-Fi Mondays, and all the students, that one day in the week, on a Monday we had it, you can't use any internet unless it's for work, and no media. You can't watch anything, nothing for one day. People really struggled, and that really worked for people because they began to walk more and talk more and things like that. So yeah. So Yeah, these phones, I don't know if that works for everybody though. This idea that, check your phone of how much you're using, it really scared the hell out of you because, or into you, because, when you realize, oh, I've been on my phone on Facebook, or one thing I will say, if you're on, what's that program? TikTok, delete it. Delete TikTok from your phone. If you got TikTok on your phone, take it off, delete it. And the reason I'm saying that is because that is just an absolute, there's no cessation. It's just video after video after video after video after video after video after video. It's just, people are just like zombies on TikTok. Just get rid of it. That will probably take most of you, give you 50% of your time back. Have you realized that the more all the new social platforms that are coming out are just extreme versions, or more extreme versions of the previous one, that it's just there to entertain you quicker and quicker and quicker and feed you every few seconds. So anyway, yeah, I mean, you can read books on it. You can read Sherry Turkle's Reclaiming Conversation, read her book Alone Together, read The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, read Mind Change by Susan Greenfield, read I Am Not a Gadget. There's loads of books on it if you like to read, and they've got good tips and stuff like that. Yeah. Social media keeps you away from reality. Region people's lives. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Let me see what else I have. Young people in their early 20s are looked up to by teens, children, even though they themselves are spiritually unqualified and properly trained. What can you teach children to give them tarbiyah? Same for teens. Basic things. Being there for them, and basic things, tarbiyah, just manners of eating, manners of sitting, how to talk to people, etc. Those are the foundational things that are very, very important. Tarbiyah for tarbiyah. How to treat guests, how to not be selfish, how to give charity. Will you do another discourse on your two-phone policy? I did plugged in many years ago. Years ago, I did many seminars on it. Yeah, I've not got any plans now. Not at the moment, no. So I'm trying to take a break, but people don't want me to do the other stuff. So yeah, we'll stop there, inshallah. Okay, if there's anything else, then otherwise we'll. TikTok has been banned from Pakistan. That wouldn't be an evidence, but because Pakistan banned a lot of random things as well. But yeah, probably. TikTok is just no good. I mean, I wonder what the next app would be, that when TikTok becomes too kind of, it's not stimulating enough, what will the next one be? I don't know. Maybe we'll see. Inshallah. We'll stop there. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر وأتوب إليه. When will you upload more on your Instagram? Oh man, stop pushing me on this one. But you know what? We set it up, and I've been really busy in my teaching Sacred Text with Dean Central as well. Been really busy, and I'm gonna make an announcement next week, inshallah, of a new project that we're launching, that I've been working on for the last 5-6 months non-stop, and that's launching as well. I've been busy on that, and I just don't have time to. I don't know. Hamza maybe push me, maybe we'll do something, but nothing in the pipeline at the moment. Sorry. For parents around social media, I did do several workshops over the years on social media and parents and media and tech. I ran a workshop called Mindless, and I would like to do that again. I think there was a sister in up north that runs who asked me to do it up north, but now with the lockdown and stuff, of course. But inshallah, that would be a good one to do as a workshop, but more in person. I would prefer that than online. Maybe we'll see. Inshallah. Stop there for today. Thank you for tuning in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Take care, everybody.